Hello and welcome to this episode of the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones, and I pastor a church in Indianapolis, Indiana called Northwood Christian Church. If you'd like to learn more about our church, I'd encourage you to write into us. That'd be a good way to get to know me, to write into me, my email, which is heath@indyncc.org. That's HEATH at INDYNCC.org. And put it on the screen right here. If you're part of our visual audience, you can write it down, maybe pause it for a second. If not, maybe rewind the tape and listen to it again. Or if you would like to join our emailing list, you could write into a different email, our office administrator at admin@indyncc.org. That's ADMIN at indyncc.org. Again, I'll put that on the screen for our viewing audience. And as for this podcast that you're listening to, it's made in partnership with the All Indiana Podcast Network. The All Indiana Podcast Network produces podcasts that are made right here in Indiana and are often about topics of interest for Hoosiers specifically. So I'll flash their logo on the screen right now for our visual audience. And for those of you who are listening, if you want to learn more about them, I would encourage you to go to their website at www.allindianapodcastnetwork.com. That's allindianapodcastnetwork.com. There you can find the dozens and dozens of podcasts that they produce. Also, you can find them by going to Wish TV's website, by typing in www.wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. So enough of the housekeeping issues. Here in a moment, we're going to turn to consider a passage from the Bible, from the book of Acts, chapter 2. But before we get to that, we have to pause for some ads for our podcast audience. So I'll see those of you who are listening after a break, which is now. 2, 3, 4, and we're back. Or at least some of you are. Some of you, those of you watching me through that, never left. Kind of awkward. But whatever. We're moving on to the passage from the Bible that we're considering today, which I said before is in the book of Acts, chapter 2, specifically verses 42 through 49. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 49. And here goes. It reads, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved." Now, there's a solid chance you've heard the above quoted words before. In fact, if you've spent much time at all in church, I'm sure that you've heard a number of sermons even on these verses. I have preached sermons, I think even a sermon series on these verses. So this description of the church is probably not new to you, and this description of the church in its infancy, in those early years, has inspired me more than once, and countless others as well. So when I saw that this was one of the suggested lectionary readings for this week's Sunday worship, I nearly rolled my eyes. I almost decided immediately not go in that direction because I could not imagine that I'd discover anything more to say about these verses. I tried to picture myself preaching a sermon to a room of congregants, or even in this moment now, talking into a screen recording this, to a prospective audience who have heard this all before. After all, isn't this passage simply describing plain and ordinary church? Teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, praying. It's fairly basic, all of it. And I've been a part of a church from the moment that I was born until this present moment while I'm talking to you. So I've sat through countless hours of this, of Christian education. There's your teaching. I've gone to hundreds, if not more, if not thousands, of church functions. There's your fellowship. I've taken communion every Sunday for many years now. That's my breaking of bread. And I've prayed more hours than I can recall, from the pulpit, from the front, and in my private life. And still, the Christian communities that have nourished me, doing all the right things, but they have not seemed so vibrant and full of life as this one that's described in the book of Acts. So I'm wondering, may there be a missing ingredient? And there is a word that grabbed my attention on this reading, on this go around, the word devoted, as in they devoted themselves in verse 42. And I looked into this word. They devoted themselves, devoted in the Greek. And I looked at the English translation that we have for this word devoted, compared it to the Greek. And the original Greek conveys the same sense that our modern English word does, devoted. If you think you know what that means, you probably know what the original Greek word meant. Here is described a focus and an attention towards something, a commitment to a person, place, or a practice. For example, a devoted racquetball enthusiast will apply their focus and attention to their passion. They will commit themselves to this passion over other interests. In other words, they will be devoted to their interest. And the early Christians were committed to the life of their churches, devoted to the life of their church, which was far more important to them than racquetball. So I'm not saying that people in church aren't devoted, at least in some ways. We are very devoted to a variety of things, in fact. We are devoted to certain rituals and practices. Boy, aren't we ever. To ways of being. We are devoted to certain worship styles and aesthetics. Boy, aren't we ever. Some are perhaps too devoted on their pastors. Cults of personality are real problems in religious communities. In short, I could go on and list things that we're devoted to. Many, many things that we're devoted to in church. We are devoted to maintaining order. Some churches are devoted to amassing wealth, which has been a huge problem. But are we devoted to the one crucial thing that I noticed in this passage? They were devoted to one another. Are we devoted to one another? I encourage you to go back and read the second chapter of Acts. Then read the whole book if you've got the time. And what I noticed on this go around was how the life of the community was organized around activities that tightened the bonds of intimacy within the church. Let me tell you about a different church, one that you may have heard of, called Crystal Cathedral in Orange County, California. It opened in 1980. It featured more than 10,000 panes of glass. It was all made of glass, most of its facade. And it seated about 3,000 worshipers and had 1,000 singers and musicians up at the front. So one can imagine it. Vaulted glass ceilings, the light filtering in and casting brilliant fractals. It was inspired by the vision of one Robert H. Schuller, now deceased. He was one of the first and most groundbreaking televangelists. And at his peak, Schuller's television program, The Hour of Power, attracted 1.3 million viewers from all over the world. And here, just to give you an idea of his ministry and his life, I'll just quote from his obituary, Robert Schuller's obituary in the New York Times, to give you an idea as to the scale of his ministry in his Crystal Cathedral. And here I'm quoting from the New York Times, his obituary. For more than 40 years, Dr. Schuller was an apostle of positive thinking and a symbol of success. A charismatic shepherd, he was one of television's first preachers to reach audiences around the world with a hopeful message of self-healing and self-empowerment. Typically wearing lavender and purple vestments and a broad smile, he became a Sunday morning fixture in countless homes, a kind-faced, white-haired pastor delivering sermons on Hour of Power. Inaugurated in 1970, it became the nation's most watched weekly religious program in the 1980s. Probably nothing symbolized the ambition of his enterprise more than the Crystal Cathedral, a glass-sheathed edifice built on 40 acres in Garden Grove, California, and opened in 1980. It cost $18 million, the equivalent of $51 million today. One of the country's first megachurches, the cathedral gave Dr. Schuller an imposing pulpit from which to reach his global flock, not to mention a roomy stage for his showmanship. The church's Christmas pageant came complete with live camels and horses and angels overhead on cables, end quote. As Schuller aged, he would try to hand off his church, his Crystal Cathedral, to his son. And then after disputes about the church's future vision, his son was removed and then he put his daughter in charge. But without its founder, the Crystal Cathedral would, over the course of a decade and then a new decade, falter. So here again, quoting from his obituary in the Times. Like other empires, Dr. Schuller's Crystal Cathedral Ministries faltered after he stepped down as its leader in 2006. Crushing debt from lavish overspending, a changing religious broadcast industry, an aging audience, and a mishandled family succession all contributed to its filing for bankruptcy in 2010. The Crystal Cathedral was sold to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange County in 2012. So fascinating history there, oversimplified to be sure. Point is, the founder left and it fizzled. I bring up the Crystal Cathedral and Robert Schuller here not to disparage him, his ministry, or to bring up scruples about his theology. I bring him up now to highlight one of the more obvious contemporary examples of a church rising and falling with its pastor. A church devoted to its pastor. The church was devoted to a celebrity minister and the experience he was able to produce for them. But without him, it didn't work. And it didn't continue, at least not in the way that they had known. For a church to last through the generations, past its founders, its members' devotion must extend beyond the minister, beyond the building and the style, the ways that they worship and experience worship together. A church is strong and has staying power when its members are devoted to one another. Other things too, but also and especially to one another. The church that we read about in today's reading from the book of Acts were devoted not just to the teachings of Paul, Peter, or any other charismatic leader. No, they were devoted to also one another and to Jesus. And they built no cathedrals, but their church continues to this day. The fellowship, the intimate communion they shared with one another was one way that they lived into the calling that Jesus had placed on their lives. I included that 46th verse in the reading so you can notice that they gathered after they were at church. They gathered together in the sanctuary. They spent so much time in the sanctuary that they would go home and then gather in the homes of the church's early members. Most of the communal life of the early church, we believe today, happened in their homes. And this shouldn't surprise us because they were devoted to one another. You spend a lot of time with the people you're devoted to, in their homes or otherwise. So you don't need a charismatic leader or Crystal Palace to do this. You just need connection with the ordinary and extraordinary people around you. The church thrived when the people were devoted to many things, to God and to worship, but especially and essentially to one another. They were devoted to one another, so they cared for one another in every way. The community described in the reading that we just went through seems a description of what so many people in fact want today. A community of mutual support comprised of friends and family members devoted to the cares and concerns of everyone in the community. People want this, and the church is supposed to meet these desires. Many churches have long been places where people will meet and gather, sure, once a week for a performative worship experience. They may enter the sanctuary for this experience, face forward and receive it, and then leave with very few meaningful interactions with other people. So churches can seem isolating and lonely places. Even a Crystal Cathedral may seem lonely when the people are gone. But in a church where the people are devoted to one another, the isolation and loneliness are resolved as its members are drawn closer and closer together by the love they share. Or, as the writer in today's reading put it, by being devoted to fellowship, which is one way of saying devoted to spending time together, devoted to one another. So I think it may all start with that word devotion and figuring out what are you devoted to. And for a church, it starts with a commitment to love devotedly each other, one another, even before the passion of love has grown in us. The growth of the church is rooted in this kind of devotion, one that calls our focus outward and towards the others that surround us, one that calls us away from our consumerist mindset that is looking for products that serve us and rather is there to serve our friends and our neighbors. Theoretically, it should not matter much who leads a congregation. If the bonds of love in the congregation are strong between the persons in the pews, then the church has a foundation that will not shift with changes in leadership, with trends, or even changes in worship styles. If we devote ourselves to a personality, a building, or the superficial trappings of religion, your ecclesia or your gathering will one day disperse. So we're not here to build crystal cathedrals. They're too fragile and temporary. We are here to build a community that sustains us, sustains our children, and will support others that we meet along the way. And the glue that binds us is, and must continue to be, the love and devotion we have for one another. Through thick and through thin. That's the idea. And if we remain devoted to what matters most, the church endures. This has been the pattern through history. So, devote yourself to all of the important things, but also to fellowship with your brothers and sisters at church. Attend scheduled church gatherings. Organize church gatherings of your own wherever you worship. If you don't like the ones you've got, organize ones of your own with the cooperation of your brothers and sisters in that church. Talk to people before and after church. That's a simple thing you could change. If you're rushing in and rushing out, stop and sit and talk with people before and after. Or invite someone that you don't know very well out to lunch or to dinner or even to your home. Call someone from your church that you haven't spoken to in a while. Devote yourself to the life that Jesus has called us to, which means devote yourself to the care and concern of the people at your church. Devote yourselves to one another, and the church will not fall. Instead, it grows in the ways that matter most, as described in the passage we read today. And I'll just end by quoting it, starting one more time with verse 46 and going on through verse 47. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.